Do you have a child who might be an INTJ? Perhaps you are one yourself still in school and trying to understand why you are so different and why it is hard to set goals that make sense in this extroverted world. I'm only going to offer my personal opinions, and I make no claims to any credentials other than I have been there myself and encountered some bumps in the road. I spent a large portion of my childhood alone. Sometimes I was alone in my room. Sometimes I was alone in my yard, or the area around my yard. I was not a complete recluse. I had friends in the neighborhood, but I seldom had more than one really close friend, and had times where I didn't even have that. I would like to discuss how being alone, in my view, was not the terrible thing that many people thought it was. For the introvert, there is a wonderful feeling of peace that comes from solitude. That time alone is healthy time to gather your inner thoughts together and have a party with them. Did you see the movie Miracle on 34th Street with Natalie Wood? Natalie played Susan Walker, a precocious little girl. There was a scene where Kris Kringle was explaining to Susan that the imagination was like a country, a nation, a place to visit and to enjoy. If you look at the scene closely, you will see that Susan is a solitary girl. She is self-contained, and her reaction to the other kids was that she felt they were silly. Assume for a moment that Susan Walker was an INTJ. Now, Susan had the opportunity to play with the other children, as she stated, but in the end, she chose to be by herself. The other kids didn't reject her. She rejected their games. And yet, Kris Kringle's behavior suggested that Susan should have joined in with the others and didn't think the other children were being silly at all. Something important in that scene is the fact that Susan was interacting with Kris one-on-one. She was being treated as a person who needed to be reasoned with, and she didn't run away and hide from this. Instead, she engaged in the discussion, and even as young as she was, she attempted to analyze things and understand what went on behind the scenes. There were also several other places in the movie where Susan was trying to think her way through to arrive at a logical conclusion. She learned a new skill, how to mimic the behavior of a monkey, and she jumped into the task with gusto. Notice that she was not excited about all the other kids. While Kris assumed she would be part of the kids' menagerie in the future, Susan really never stated that she was going to use this new skill in that fashion. She could if she chose to, but also she could choose to not use it in that way. And Susan was very practical. She was the only one in the movie who was actually open to the apparently impossible idea that Kris Kringle really was Santa Claus. However, she demanded proof before she would accept him. When she had proof, she believed. Prior to that, she only accepted the fact that belief was possible. It seems silly, mind you, but still possible. When she had the proof, she acted just like an INTJ in that she embraced the conclusion as being valid. Even her mom and Uncle Fred didn't really believe at that point. But little Susan was walking on her own intellectual path, and she knew, because she had the proof in hand that Kris Kringle really was Santa Claus. This is exactly how the INTJ mind works. A final point on this example. Susan was excited, not because she was going to have friends over to her new house. Her mother was excited about that, but not Susan. Susan first ran up to look at her room to see if it was a place that would be worthy of spending her time. And then she checked the yard to see if it had what she wanted, a swing. And she displayed emotions. Yes, we have emotions, very strong ones. But they were based on facts and projections. Here was the house, and the future would be very pleasant for her because of it. Understanding brought her joy. Those who don't understand INTJs would look at this as being egocentric or even narcissistic, but it isn't that at all. Susan was focused on the things that mattered to her. You could see from her behavior throughout the movie that Susan was a loving daughter and a caring friend to the adults around her. It is no aberration that her friends were adults. She really did think that kids were silly in their little world of make-believe. Not one word was uttered by Susan when she got to the house about how she would miss her friends. She was happy to be moving to a place that would make her solitary existence more comfortable. She would probably find a friend, but it was not her primary focus. As a parent, what can you offer to a child like Susan? Susan needed to be loved, just as any child does. Her mother was very important to Susan. Engaging in interesting talks with Uncle Fred and Kris Kringle were important to her as well. She was open to speaking with a serious mind and enjoying the process as it occurred. This is what an INTJ child wants and needs. I mentioned in an earlier video that I was captivated by John Bunyan's book, Pilgrim's Progress. What I didn't mention was that my mother told me several times that, even at that young age, I understood the story better than she did. However, her reaction was not to try and bend my mind into more normal paths, but to read the book to me again. She probably was happy when I finally learned how to read it for myself, because then she didn't have to read that book to me anymore. Having advanced minds to engage with is important to an INTJ. Dealing with the childhood equivalent of small talk can leave an INTJ child feeling apathetic. While he may play with the other children, and even have fun doing so up to a point, he will tend to pull back into his own space regularly to regroup. But there can be pain as well. INTJs only make up 2% of the population in the United States. That means if you have a group of 50 people, there will, on average, only be one INTJ within it. If you have a group of 25 people, you may not have any of us. So, take a classroom with 30 or 40 kids in it, and how many INTJs will there be? If you are one of them, as I was, man, you are all alone. None of the others in your class are like you. What you want from others is respect, to be treated with dignity as you would treat them. You don't bully them into becoming thinkers and loners, but often they are happy to bully you for being different. Worse, even adults will assume that something is wrong with you and that you need to socialize more. Here you are, stuck in a classroom with people who are noisy, who appear to be shallow and sometimes cruel to you, and you are the one called out for not wanting more of this abuse. If an INTJ child doesn't have a good mentor, someone who understands that he is not broken but only gifted, he can feel that he is not at all validated as a person. He is not okay. The kids pick on him, and he is told he needs to be more like them. Is this logical? Of course not. But as a child, it is hard to realize that you just might be right, and even adults might be wrong. I can only imagine what it must be like to have a family where you can be an INTJ and not feel abused in one way or another growing up. But the fantasy is a happy one. What if I could have been praised for wanting to spend time alone and to read and contemplate things? What if my father had been sober and would have engaged me as a thinking person to discuss interesting topics on a friendly basis? On very rare occasions, these conversations did occur, but they were far and away the exception. Had I been accepted and encouraged, rather than having to figure things out for myself for most of my childhood, what things might I have accomplished? A rational child who loves to read and think should be every parent's desire. Such a child could be a friend and would bring something to even adult-level problems, sometimes with insights that adults might miss. Unfortunately, a lot of INTJ children are thought of as dysfunctional, and they are treated as though they need to be fixed. In a way, it is like finding oil on your property, and instead of celebrating and becoming rich, you cover it up and try to make it appear as though the oil didn't exist. Since I've already mentioned an old movie, I will mention another one of my favorites, No Highway in the Sky, with Jimmy Stewart. He played a scientist, Theodore Honey. He had a daughter named Elspeth, played by Janet Scott, and she was amazing. Theodore was brilliant and absent-minded. Elspeth was also brilliant and introverted to the bone. The two of them shared a world of brain puzzles and knowledge, and they were happy together. But then Elspeth found that being accepted into a group could be a welcome change for a time. But when it crashed down upon her, she was horribly crushed. She was crying to her father about the impermanence of things, and he was lost in how to comfort his little introvert. It is one of the most touching scenes that I have ever seen in a movie, probably because I could relate to both the father and the child in the room trying to deal with emotions when thinking was their world. The others in the movie were completely lost in trying to understand how the minds of Theodore and Elspeth worked. Even at the end, the wonderful extrovert Marjorie Corder, played magnificently by Glynis Johns, made the decision that she was going to marry Theodore and watch over the introverted family, which would have been lost without her. I worry about how Marjorie would fare in such a home, but having lived most of my adult life with a very strongly extroverted ESTP, I think the three of them could have made a happy life together. She might get lost when Theodore and Elspeth got into a deep discussion about the mathematical relationship with the Great Pyramid dimensions and its placement relative to the orientation of the Earth's rotation, or they got to playing one of their exciting mental games. But she would open up a lot of new things to them as well. And this is a critical point. There is nothing wrong with any personality type. It is not a moral or ethical question whether you are extroverted or introverted, any more than it is such a question whether you are left or right-handed. You are who you are, and who you are is okay. What is an ethical question, however, is how you treat others. If you treat an introverted child as though he is broken and needs fixing, you will create a dilemma within him. You are setting up roadblocks to his achieving a cosmological wholeness with the universe and those around him. An INTJ wants things to make sense. He can have conflicting ideas in his mind simultaneously because he can place his assessment on hold as he searches for more facts so he can properly evaluate the ideas. It happens all the time. It is normal routine inside my brain. But a young child sees his parents as infallible authorities. If they say something, it must be right. I can still remember my early days when a discussion would be ended with a friend on the note that it is true because my father said so. There was no way to challenge that argument at the time. So if your parents tell you that what you feel inside is wrong, you will be confused for a time. It creates a problem to be resolved that doesn't need to be there. This is simply wrong, ethically wrong, and logically wrong as well. If you want your child to thrive, don't tell him he is not okay being himself. Teach him manners, by all means. Teach him tact and how to act in a civilized way. These are all good things. But don't tell him there's something wrong with him because he doesn't want to be like the other kids. What many other personality types don't understand is that there can be true joy in pulling facts together and making them work inside a model. The Earth goes around the Sun. The Sun is part of the Milky Way galaxy. Our galaxy is one of the galaxies in our local cluster of galaxies, and so on. The universe is made up of things we know and things we don't know. And for an INTJ to move something from the I don't know column over to the I know column brings joy to his heart. Yes, I mean joy, not just satisfaction. The introvert can be a lot tougher than you might realize. We have to be. We grow up in a world that doesn't like introversion. The world calls us names like shy or antisocial. If you grow up being called names, you will find defenses against it. Sometimes you might pass through a stage of rebellion and start to lash out with verbal barbs to shut the extroverted attacks down, pointing out the deplorable state of the bully's intellectual dexterity and profoundly deficient potential for cognitive expansion. The bully may not even understand the insult, but the introvert will still feel better for knowing that it is valid. If truly angered, an INTJ may go so far as to dumb down his insults to the level where the attacker can actually understand it, by saying that if the unfortunate creature studies really hard, he might raise his intellect to match that of the village idiot. It is a time of transition or coming of age, when an INTJ realizes, finally, that there is nothing wrong with him. There is room for growth always, but that is what he does best. He is always looking for directions where he can grow. If others will simply refrain from trying to make him into an ESTP or an ESFP. There is a place in our society for every personality type. The INTJ, like Elon Musk, can flourish, just like the ESFP Elvis Presley, who is known as the King. The contributions from these different types will be different as well, but they are significant. We can't all be great scientists. There are many roles to fill in a society. What you need to understand is that a child is not inferior or broken when he is introverted. If he prefers to read rather than to play checkers or go to a party, it is not evil or dysfunctional. It is his natural preference. It is okay. If she prefers to listen to Mozart while writing a short story, rather than playing jacks or hopscotch or watching TV, she is okay. Take your gifted child by the hand, please, and lead him forward to high self-esteem, and help him to accomplish the great things that he would naturally reach for, and you will create not only a healthy, happy INTJ child, but a friend for the rest of your life. If you are that child, trying to find your own way in this crazy world of social interaction on steroids, don't despair. You are okay. It is just fine to be who you are, even when you are different. While you grow strong in your self-confidence, try to avoid the pitfall of arrogance. When you've had years of abuse from people calling you names and laughing at you, it is easy to look down on them as being morons and being beneath you, but that is letting them set your agenda for you. You set your actions. You decide what you will do. Don't ever hand this priceless freedom to decide to others, especially those who have treated you badly. They don't get to decide who you are going to be. You do. If you are an INTJ, you will find your path and you will walk it. If you are lucky, you will have parents who will help you do that. If you are not so fortunate, do not despair. Today is not all there is. Your mind is set on the future. And if you embrace that and hold true to yourself, you will step out from under the clouds of misunderstanding into the bright sunlight of your self-directed life. Your friends will be few, but they will be awesome. And be confident that in your future, you will be awesome too. Thank you for watching the video. And don't forget to click like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.